For our aspiring actuaries, what are the kinds of companies that hire actuaries?
For what the salary is for that role.
Money is important, but it's not always the most important thing. Kind of push yourself and step out of your comfort zone.
Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of my podcast. Today we have special guests. We have actuarial recruiters here with us who have been in the recruiting business for long. Interestingly, one of our guests is an actuary as well, so we will explore a lot around that in a bit. So welcome Rob and Tom to the podcast. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. So Rob is a partner at BWD Search and Selection. He has been an actuary. He's worked with KPMG, Mercer and First Actuarial, and then gotten into actuarial recruiting. Thank you so much for being here today. And Tom, I've known Tom for a couple of years now, but finally meeting him in person today. He's a consultant at BWD Search and Selection, both for life and non-life actuarial. He has been an HR coordinator at the London Business School and also worked in sales in Prism. Thank you, Tom, for being here today. Anything that I've missed in your introductions which you would like to add or introduce yourself? Rob, why don't you go first?
No, that's great. No, thanks for that introduction. I'm sure we'll get into what we do during the podcast.
Great. Tom, anything from you?
Just probably kind of echoing what you said about the actuarial market before I started this job. I had no idea what an actuary was, and probably still don't understand it as much as you two. But it's good to be here.
Before we start, I just want to understand how you got into the actuarial recruiting business, because I can imagine it's quite a niche field for an actuarial profession. You also need to understand the technical words or the jargons a little bit to really understand whether they fit into the role. So how did you get into the actuarial recruitment journey, which is quite niche?
Do you want to go first, Tom? And then I'll tell my story.
So I started in recruitment back in 2019. So I'd been travelling, the kind of typical Australia, Southeast Asia, and moved up to Leeds. Interviewed at a few places, and I think kind of what stood out about BWD is the culture, and also I just found it really interesting in terms of the actuarial market. As I said, no idea what an actuary was, did the research, and I just found it really interesting, and I knew that it was something that I'd enjoy speaking to candidates about, and learning more kind of about the things that they do. As I said, I'm still learning now every time I speak to people.
Yeah, I can imagine. When the first time the recruiter there reached out to you and said, "Oh, we are recruiting for actuarial," what did you think then?
Okay. Let me look at what that means.
Google that up quickly. No, that's so interesting, and we'll unfold a lot of your professional journey as well around that in a bit. Rob, how did you get into that, especially being an actuary? How did you think of recruitment as a profession?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and maybe I'll start with. So when I was 10 years old, my head teacher told me I was going to be an actuary. Really? And I had no idea what she was talking about.
Can I meet your teacher and know what's going to happen 20 years later?
I don't know where she is now, but so she said that when I was at junior school when I was 10, and then I just forgot about that for a few years, and then eventually went to university and then started my actuarial career. I did 20 odd years as a qualified pensions actuary. You mentioned the firms I work with. And then about just under 3 years ago now, was looking for something that would use the kind of network that I built up, the understanding and the knowledge that I had in that area. Knew the guys at BWD, and so I had started a conversation with them, and here we are 3 years later recruiting. But it's quite useful that I come from that background, so I can understand the roles and I can understand what the clients are looking for. And again, we'll touch on some of the areas that I do recruit on. But yeah, it's amazing how much is actually quite similar in a way. Although I'm not hands-on doing the work, regularly talking to clients about what they're doing and trying to keep on top of the industry. So where the industry is going is where the jobs will follow. So it's important to stay up to date with what's going on.
I can imagine that must be very insightful as well, right? When you hear about new roles from your clients, which I assume are different kinds of insurance companies, consulting companies, etc. Surely that must be very insightful to really exciting.
No, I was just going to add that. So I feel like I know more now than I did while I was an actuary. Because when you're working for one company, you've got quite a narrow view of the world. When you're working with lots of actuarial consultancies, insurers and so on, you're hearing lots of different things that are going on. And also people that you speak to, their guards are down. So when you speak to them as a competitor,
Yeah.
you know, I previously worked at actuarial consultancies. If I spoke to somebody at another actuarial consultancy, they wouldn't tell me what was going on. Whereas now, you know, the doors are open and they'll tell me lots of things that's going on.
That's so interesting.
So-
I'm almost lured into this.
Yeah. And we'll come on to it in a moment. When I came in 3 years ago, we were only working in the UK. Tom and myself now, we're also doing roles out in the US and Canada as well. So we'll talk about some of those
Interesting.
developments.
Before we get into the details of the markets and, you know, the kind of actuaries you hire, for our aspiring actuaries, I just want to get a basic question out of the way, which is, what are the kinds of companies that hire actuaries, and what are the main kind of areas where actuaries work in the market? If you can shed a little bit of light on that.
Yeah, sure. If I start and then you add. So coming from a pensions background, that's where a lot of my focus is on. So if I kind of talk about the UK pensions industry first, and then a little bit how that overlaps into insurance, and then Tom, if you pick up insurance. But in the pensions industry in the UK, we work with pensions consultancies. So consulting actuaries, so actuaries where they will be advising companies or trustees of pension schemes. We don't just work with actuaries, we work with investment consultants, administrators and professional trustee firms as well, where a lot of actuaries have been moving across to. There's also kind of the crossover industry, which is particularly growing at the moment, is the risk transfer, so bulk purchase annuity insurers. So in the UK, you know, we're up to 9, I think, now, insurers. And that's interesting because that's an area I worked in 20 years ago when there was only 2 insurers, you know, Prudential and Legal and General. Now we've got 9 insurers. And the funding position of pension schemes has meant that activity has dramatically increased. So there's lots of opportunities in the pensions industry, but also now in the insurers looking for pricing actuaries, for business development actuaries and so on. But Tom, if you want to add to the life and non-life.
Yeah. So as Rob said, so life and non-life is kind of the markets I look after. As Rob said, sort of that there is that sort of crossover with the kind of risk transfer bulk purchase annuity market. So we are seeing that kind of, you know, that kind of skill set in demand at the moment. Probably what I've noticed on the life side as well, there's been a lot of demand for sort of the capital ALM space. That's sort of really something I've noticed, especially kind of this year. So and kind of in that is obviously with the investment actuaries slightly different to, you know, the pension side. And then on the non-life side, probably what I've noticed this year, there's still sort of the need for pricing actuaries, and capital as well seems to be one. Reserving less so, kind of from what I've noticed this year. But yeah, definitely pricing and capital seem to be those kind of areas. And actually, interestingly, over the last probably 18 months, maybe even 2 years, I've seen a lot of people move from pensions to non-life, particularly at the kind of part qualified level, which is something I hadn't kind of, you know, noticed before.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think there's a lot of crossover with kind of the pensions market, especially at that kind of junior level.
Yeah, I can imagine. So from what I understand is we have a life insurance side of things, a non-life insurance side of things, and then the pensions, which are the traditional roles that actuaries have been doing. Of course, we now have banking, risk transfers, and investment actuaries and others. But in the profession, from what I understand, there's pricing, reserving, and capital actuaries that are in demand. But of course, the demand of those actuaries depend on the year, the kind of cycle that we're going through. But what you mentioned is really interesting, which is the transfer of actuaries from one field to another. I see that people are coming from all kinds of backgrounds, right? And there is a certain transferability of skills between different fields that I'm seeing, that even if you're a non-life actuary or a pensions actuary, the basic skills are transferable, and we are seeing more people transferring fields now. Is that what you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I'd say as well, there was an example from a life GI capital modelling role, and they were open to people from a life side having that capital modelling experience, because especially before you've sat your specialist papers, they could kind of see that transferable skills in terms of the capital modelling. So that's kind of another example from life to GI.
Interesting. Could you kind of shed some light on how employers think about it, right? We always think of it from an employee's point of view. So it's very interesting to have your perspective on this, which is when, as an actuary, for example, if I have worked 6 years in general insurance. If I want to move, that reason is quite driven by how I want to take my career, I want to develop, I want to learn new things. It kind of comes from that point of view. However, for an employer, it's not about that, right? For an employer, they want to get work done, they want to increase productivity, efficiency. I'm sure those are the more important concerns. So why are employers open to actuaries transferring from different fields when they could hire someone with experience in that particular area? Why are insurers open to that?
First of all, it kind of depends on the level. So at the very junior end, it's relatively relatively infrequent that people are moving around. Okay. But as you get closer to qualifying, you're quite attractive to all, the life, general or pension side, because you've had a few years experience, you've got a few exams under your belt, and you've not yet become too expensive to move. Once you're qualified and beyond, then that's when it comes into the transferable skill sets, and also the depending on the supply and demand of people. If there's a real shortage of talent, then firms, insurers and so on will have to kind of widen their net a little bit and just think very carefully about what is it that they actually need. So if they need somebody who's got a business development kind of skill set, then they might be more open to the background of that individual. Obviously, if it's a very hands-on technical role, they'll need to have that technical expertise. But quite often as you go through your actuarial career, you do a lot of your technical at the start, and then as you go through your career, you do less and less technical and more client management and business development. So, it very much comes down to the role, to the level, and to the talent shortage or otherwise.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Do you want to add something?
I'd agree. There's one thing I'd kind of add. So it can also depend on the actual hiring manager themselves. So a couple of the examples I mentioned, the hiring manager had moved from life to non-life.
Right.
So they're a bit more, they could see the value.
They're more flexible, yeah.
And then again, the other example, hiring manager moved from pensions to non-life early in their career. So I think they can see the value and there's maybe there's a bit more openness. I think sometimes there is still that preference for, someone to kind of from the field, so from non-life or from life. But I think there is still kind of that being open to other.
That's actually quite interesting to hear because, when you're just starting your career, you're so intimidated that you have to choose the right field because this is what you're going to do for the next 30 years. So it's heartening to hear that there is scope of flexibility. You can try new things and employers especially are open to that. Something I want to also, what you mentioned around the supply and demand, which is quite interesting, right? In India, when I was studying, I think there was always this perception that there are more actuaries than needed. And, that's why there are no jobs. And we were all so scared that we wouldn't land a job after college. I feel in the UK, that's not the case, at least in my perception. Of course, that's what I want your insight on. But my understanding is that there are not enough actuaries to fill those jobs.
Sometimes I feel like I've only been recruiting for less than 3 years, and can I really give an expert answer on recruitment? But in those 3 years or so, I've just seen that there's more roles than candidates. So there's a real shortage of actuaries. There's a real shortage of good talent. So if you and there's two ways of doing recruitment. You can work the role and go and headhunt and find some candidates, or you can work closely with a candidate and find them a role. And what I've found is when I've been typically working with somebody, with a candidate, it's been relatively easy to find opportunities for them and then help them through that process. So It certainly seems in the UK over the last 3 years, and maybe it's a bit of catch up after COVID and certain growth areas. But where there is growth, there's certainly a shortage, I think, of good talent. And that's what's driving recruitment in the UK.
Yeah, I'd agree. In sort of the 5 years that I've been doing it, it is a very candidate short market. And yeah, I was going to sort of mention what Rob said there as well about maybe there was maybe reluctance sort of just after COVID to maybe move just because maybe there was a bit of uncertainty, which kind of eased off, I think, sort of around maybe 6 months to a year after. But yeah, maybe there's a bit of reluctance to kind of move in that period. But yeah, it's definitely a candidate short market in the UK.
That's very interesting. And what's your usual route? So, for example, an actuary or someone who is working in different field wants to actually make a move. How do they usually go about? Do they reach out to the recruiters? Do they reach out to companies? For all the aspiring actuaries listening and, wanting to make a move, if you could shed some light into what is the process of getting a job, because I get that question a lot, that how do you move? Who do I reach out to? How do I get there? But I've always, in my career at least, I've only made a move once, but that is through recruiters like yourself. So I just want to get some understanding of how usually candidates can go through and reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. And obviously I've seen it from both sides. So I've been an actuary, how I'd changed roles twice. So I worked with 3 consultancies. One was through a recruiter, the other 2 were kind of direct approaches. I also experienced receiving lots of attention from recruiters. In the old days, it used to be around exam time. The phone would go around the office. You get the in-mails.
Especially after the results, right?
Especially around results time. They're not always, they weren't always kind of anything to do with the area that I worked in. So I've seen it from that side and, and shared many. Coming into recruitment myself, it gave me a sense of what I thought was important in terms of how I work with candidates. So I don't send any anonymous emails, anonymous LinkedIn messages. I don't even have that facility to do that. It's something I didn't want from day one. So I can't send an email to 400 people. All of my connections and communications are one-to-one. So that's one of the things that I do. But discovered as a recruiter, which I didn't appreciate when I was an actuary, is how much the recruiter can help you. Firstly, in finding and being aware of the opportunities. If you go to a careers website of a firm that an insurer you might like to work for, it could well be that the role that the recruiter has is not on that careers website. So you wouldn't find it yourself. It wouldn't necessarily be advertised on LinkedIn. So it's only because that recruiter is working closely with that firm that they're aware of that role. I think the second thing is that to have a feel for what the salary is for that role, the recruiter will have that information. It's not always presented, again, on the careers website or on a LinkedIn advert. So the recruiter will be able to advise you, whether it's at the right level for you, and if you were to suggest what salary you'd be looking for, whether you're within the bracket that they're looking for. And the recruiter can actually guide you through. They'll know through the interviews. They'll have had a briefing call with the client, with the insurer. So they'll know what that insurer is looking for and be able to help you through that process. So I've really learned, and I would say this, I'm a recruiter now, but I've really now understood the value of working with a recruiter. The one piece of advice I would give is, kind of 2 pieces of advice, but about the same thing. So try to only really work with one recruiter if you can. If you work with too many recruiters, there's a danger that it's hard to track where your CV is going, or your CV might end up at the same firm from multiple recruiters. So try to work with one recruiter, but make sure it's a recruiter that you trust, that you and that they're being open and honest with you about which firms they actually do work with. If there are firms they don't work with, then by all means go and use a recruiter that is working with that firm. Sorry, Tom.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And I'd just say in terms of As a candidate, I can imagine it's, as Rob just said there, it probably got overwhelming getting so many emails, especially since you've changed stuff to open to work. But yeah, I think from my side, I just try to stay in touch with candidates. If a role comes up and sort of have the briefing, read the job spec, and think, yeah, I've got a candidate that I think would be good for this, and then give them a call and sort of go through it with them. Obviously, send out emails as well. But I think that's kind of the best thing that I find is sort of staying in touch with candidates and kind of having a list of candidates that one you think would be good for different roles, and the ones that you kind of have that relationship with. What I would say, what my advice would be that, and it probably easier said than done because money is important, but it's not always the most important thing. Someone could be on a lot more money in another company, but they could be working very long hours and not get to enjoy that time outside of work. So as we were saying before, it's good to be in the office, but obviously it's good to have that mix to still kind of live your life outside of work as well. So that's what my advice would be, that sometimes the progression and the opportunities within a company can be more important than maybe kind of what you're being paid. But
Yeah.
I know
It's very difficult.
it is
No,
difficult.
yeah. No, but you're right. I think that's something I fully believe in, because I feel the money component gets adjusted either sooner or later, right? You will get what you're worth. It's about doing the work that you enjoy. I'm very excited to go to work on a Monday morning, and I wouldn't change that for, like, let's say 10% lesser salary or 10% higher salary, because that's what keeps you going. And money is something which I feel is very important. Like you said, we all work for because we're getting paid, but at the same time, it's about deciding what is most important to you in that role. It's that learning, it's that progression, or the opportunities, or the kind of work that you get to do, and the variety that you get to do. So we'll move on to the next part, which is something that all our aspiring actuaries are very keen to hear. We will not talk about salaries as a principle in this episode, but just in general around what are employees looking for, and how can they upskill themselves to get to that position. That's the most difficult question to answer, because even someone who comes up to me and says, what should I do to get myself more employable, it's very hard to answer that question, because it depends on the role that you're eyeing for. So in general, what is the trend that you're seeing in the market, that this is the most employable skill, or this is something that aspiring actuaries of today can do to get themselves more employable? It's a loaded question.
Yeah, well, I think you said it there, that it very much depends on the role that they're doing. But I think piece of advice for everybody is always to continually be growing your network and professional relationships that you're building up, staying close to what's going on in the industry. And again, it depends whether you're looking for a consulting role, whereas obviously the skill set they're looking for there is ability to work with clients and prospects and new business type things, or if it's more of a technical role, it's keeping up to speed on the latest regulatory changes and so on. You got something to add maybe on the more technical side?
Yeah, well, I think what I've noticed, and I think you'd probably agree with this, that it's always been this way in terms of, but I think what I've noticed has become more important than ever is having the kind of communication skills and the business sense, as well as the traditional actuarial skills. What I've noticed come up more and more is being able to kind of explain and communicate to a non-technical audience, because I can imagine it's if you're having conversations with actuaries all the time, it's very easy to have those conversations because everyone understands sort of the concepts you're talking about. But I think sometimes with the stakeholder management, if you're working with other parts of the business, being able to explain to a non-technical audience is something that I've noticed come up more and more in recent times. And also having kind of inquisitive approach to your work. That's something that I've had to come up with a client before where they'd said, this person may not fit every single requirement, but if they've kind of got the right attitude and an inquisitive approach and, the right way they go about thinking things, that can sort of go a long way. If they don't necessarily sort of tick, all the requirements.
I would second that. I think we always think that, I should learn a new software. I should learn the next upcoming software and only then I will be employable. But it's actually that attitude. All these skills you can be trained, you can learn, all of that is solvable. But if you have the right attitude and the communication, I think that is something which is so valuable. So 100% agree on that. What would you say are the best days of your work life? What is the day where you feel, okay, this is the day that is gone so well? What is a good day in your working life?
As an actual recruiter, and I'll go first, Tom. So my role's split 50-50, so 50% business development, which is creating content like this. So, this is a great day for me, doing podcasts, speaking to clients, speaking to prospects. I hosted a round table recently with some of the bulk purchase annuity insurers, some of the experts in the industry. That's a great day. Speaking to the industry, listening to what's going on, hearing about what recruitment needs they have. That's what I enjoy most about my role, which is about my job, which is not just recruiting people. It's actually hearing about from the industry, directly from the industry, the experts within the industry, where their recruitment needs are, which more often than not is exactly where the growth areas of the industry are. So as I say, 50% business development, 50% I tend to do the more senior recruitment end. But yeah, and I guess on a more personal good day, that story I described before, where I'd worked with that candidate and she'd taken another role, and then came back to me, and I was able to find a role. And she was actually the very first candidate I spoke to as a recruiter. So that the day that I got her the role for the second time was a great day in recruitment.
I can imagine. Sounds wonderful. Tom?
I think a good day, obviously, what I'm going to say, when you get a good fee.
Absolutely on point. We'll cut everything out.
But I think, and a lot of people may not believe this, but I do genuinely enjoy when you can just know how happy someone is when you've got them in their dream role, and you know that they are genuinely appreciative of kind of the relationship you've built and and kind of and getting that role and helping them with that. So I think that is a good day.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I remember when I spoke to my recruiter and I got this job, I was so happy. I could feel the recruiter also being equally happy. But yeah.
And it's even better when you kind of check in with them. So, for example, I spoke to a candidate, I think it was about a year, sort of checked in with them about a year after they'd started, and they were saying to me that, I'm now leading this area, and they've progressed and they're still loving it.
We ask all our guests to give one piece of advice to all the aspiring actuaries out there. So we'll go one by one on what piece of advice you'd give that. Tom, do you want to go first?
Yeah. One piece of advice would be to kind of push yourself and step out your comfort zone. So even something like this today, I've not done anything like this before. Probably not my favourite thing to do. So I was a little bit nervous coming into it, but and it's not as scary as I expected. So I think that's when you do push yourself and step out your comfort zone, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. So that would be kind of my main, and also to maybe have a rough idea in mind in terms of your career, and maybe not be phased if things doesn't go exactly to that plan. That would be my.
That's wonderful. Amazing advice, really. Rob?
So mine is, and I touched on it early, in relationships. So relationships are absolutely crucial, and you'll build up relationships now that are still useful, not just for today, but in 20, 30 years' time. And it's so important how you treat people. So you should treat everybody the same, whether they're the receptionist or the regulator, the trainee actuary or the CEO, because one day that trainee actuary could be the CEO. So you'll realise that in 20 years' time, those relationships you built those 20 years ago are now so important in terms of your day-to-day life at that point. And I think the thing I would finish on, and you mentioned artificial intelligence before, and will AI replace actuaries? My personal view is that AI will actuaries who don't are not open to AI will struggle, but AI will certainly support actuaries. But they can only do so much, and you will never be able to take away the human side of and those interactive relationships that people have. And so relationships, build up your network, build up the people that you speak to right across the industry.
I definitely agree, and I think I definitely agree with what you said on AI. Look at it as collaboration and not competition, and that's how you will go a long way. But this has been so wonderful. I think we shed some light on the recruiter side, the employer side, and the employee side, which was so well rounded. So thank you so much for speaking to us and taking out time from your day on a Monday, which must have been very busy. But thank you so much for your time. This has been so wonderful.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much,
Thank you very
Rob.
much.
and
Thank you for having us.
Tom. Thanks a lot.